One morning, in January 1997, Ivo Hugh was taking a goods train around the lake. Snow still covered the ground, and the young engine eyed it suspiciously.
I'm not sure I like this weather, driver. It's too cold.
You're not the only one who thinks that, but it does have its advantages too. You did enjoy Christmas, didn't you?
Oh yes, that was fun, with all those decorations and singing. And we get to do that every year too. But I've heard stories from the other engines. I mean, Peter Sam told me how this ice stuff destroyed his old funnel.
Oh, that was just an accident. They do happen, but worrying too much about what might happen can be a distraction.
So, I shouldn't worry about them then?
I found that it's best to take reasonable steps to prevent them.
How do you do that?
Experience, mostly. Ivo Hugh fell silent, but the trucks behind him didn't. They whispered and giggled amongst themselves. Overhearing that conversation had given them an idea. The young engine soon reached a water tower. It had been a long and tiring journey, and he stopped for a well-deserved drink. This was where the trucks made their move.
Driver! I suppose it's too late to do anything now.
Ivo Hugh, over here! Both engine and driver sighed with relief as the guard ran up to them. The trucks threw me clear. What happened?
They went off the bridge.
Can you go and flag down any approaching trains, Jim? We'll need to get a work crew up here. The guard crossed the bridge to warn any approaching trains. Ivo Hugh headed back up the line. When he reached Skarloey station, he raised the alarm. Fred soon arrived with the work train. The workmen examined the bridge and made some minor repairs. Trains resumed running over the bridge, but the accident had caused delays. Later that day, the Thin Controller visited Ivo Hugh in Skarloey Yard, along with two gentlemen he'd called inspectors. They asked the little engine a lot of questions, some of which he couldn't answer. When they left, he couldn't help feeling nervous. For the rest of the day, all the engines had to work hard to get things back on schedule. Most of them understood, but some were not pleased about it. I'm afraid to say, Ivo Hugh was rather frazzled when he returned to the sheds that evening. Most of the other engines looked over sympathetically.
Are you alright, young Ivo?
I'm not sure. Mr. Sam and those inspectors asked me a lot of questions.
That's nothing to worry about, Ivo. Every accident needs to be investigated like that.
Indeed. It helps to prevent future accidents. The important thing is to tell the truth. If you didn't do anything wrong, then you'll have nothing to worry about.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Skarloey. Ivo Hugh, you have nothing to worry about. It seems the coupler between you and your trucks gave way. The cold must have exacerbated a hairline fracture.
Exacerbated a hairline fracture?
He means the coupling had a small crack in it, which the cold weather made worse.
Oh, thank you for letting me know, sir. But then why did the trucks come off the rails? That's got nothing to do with the coupler.
Yes and no. Some of the fish plates on that bridge were damaged the same way, by the cold. That's why we had the slow order in place.
That makes sense.
We fixed those up, but we couldn't recover those trucks. Our equipment can't reach into that gorge, even without the snow melt raising the level of the stream.
Oh, so we've lost a few trucks too? You need to be more careful. Did you not even bother to secure your trucks?
I barely stopped.
Calm down. Mr. Sam said it wasn't Ivo's fault.
Indeed, metal fatigue combined with cold weather could happen to any other engine.
But it hasn't, has it? Now we've had to work to make up time all day. It will be stored on goods capacity until the trucks are replaced. Any proper engine knows how to keep an eye on trucks.
You're right, Duncan. But how do you think an engine learns that in the first place?
Aye, well, I hope he learns sooner rather than later. We don't have an endless supply of trucks, you know.
An awkward silence fell over the shed. Late the next morning, Ivo Hugh had just dropped off some supplies for the quarry. Peter Sam had collected some slate trucks. He was waiting for Duncan to arrive, so the line would be clear for him to leave.
I'd been thinking about last night. Driver was telling me about experience. I think I got some yesterday.
You did indeed, but that's one of the downsides of experience. You don't get it until after you need it.
Be careful with those trucks, Ivo. If you lose too many, they might come back to haunt you.
Before either of the other engines could reply, Duncan was gone.
What? It sounds like he thinks I'm trying to have an accident.
Yes, I'll have to have a word with him.
Will that work? I mean, I've only known him for a few months, but he's always struck me as being, well, stubborn and grumpy.
You've got a point there. Perhaps one day he'll find something that'll make him laugh and ease up. I'll try to talk to him anyway. No engine should have to take that sort of behaviour.
Thank you, Peter Sam.
Peter Sam departed, lost in thought. He couldn't deny that Ivo Hugh had a point about Duncan. He only really listened when he wanted to. That did cause Peter Sam some concern. Unlike the other engines, Ivo Hugh wasn't even a year old. He needed time to learn what the other engines took for granted, just like he and Sir Handel had, back when they'd been Stuart and Falcon. Furthermore, he'd seen Duncan's disrespectful negativity before. Both Stanley and Andreas hadn't listened to others, and that had caused disruption and delay.
Are you alright, Peter Sam? You look like you've got something on your mind.
I have.
Peter Sam replied, and he recounted Duncan's earlier rudeness.
You're right, and more to the point, it was the type of accident that could happen to any engine. At least, that's what I heard.
Indeed. Ivo Hugh just needs the space to learn.
So, how do we convince Duncan to back off? You know what he's like.
You know, I remember one time Grandpa played a prank on me. Falcon and I had been teasing him about being old and out of puff. One evening his valves leaked and we had to rescue his train. Falcon took his passengers on, while I took Falcon's train and Grandpa back to our sheds. As we were heading along the mountain road, he laid on the steam. With his valves leaking, it sounded like he was working for both of us. When we reached the next station, the waiting passengers thought I was the one who'd broken down.
Oh, you must have been furious.
Indeed. I wasn't too happy, but he'd made his point. I've never teased him about being out of puff ever since, nor has Falcon.
So we'd need to think of a prank to convince Duncan.
I beg your pardon, but may I make a suggestion?
Of course, Percy.
What if you scared him with some sort of ghost story? I mean, I did that to Thomas once, after he teased me about believing in them. Even pretended to be one myself. You did say Duncan jeered about trucks haunting Ivo Hugh, didn't you?
That's correct.
Are there any ghost stories about freak accidents? Some incident no amount of experience would help with.
Now that you mention it, I think I did hear such a story. I see what you're getting at.
Great. Now, I'm afraid I have to get going. All my line's clear. Good luck with it.
So, what's this story you heard?
Rusty told Peter Sam, and a brief discussion followed. When it was done, the engines and their drivers had a plan. Early the next morning, Rusty was heading up the line with the works train. None of the engines had spoken of Ivo Hugh's accident in the sheds last night, but the atmosphere had been awkward. So, as he headed along the line, Rusty kept his eye out for Duncan. He found him collecting some trucks at Lakeside. Duncan bumped the trucks, but they continued to giggle.
Oh dear, are they giving you trouble, Duncan?
Just their usual tricks. Unlike some engines, I can actually handle them.
You talk as though Ivo Hugh did that deliberately. Accidents happen, and not just to trucks. like this one I heard about. A long time ago, a little engine was returning home. It was a misty, moonlit night. As the engine crossed an old iron bridge, he suddenly lost control and plunged over the side into the swamp below. He was never found again. But many workmen will tell you that when the moon is full, they have seen the little engine trying to get home, but he never reaches the other side.
Ghosts? Things that go bump in the night? What a load of nonsense.
With that, Duncan left. As he did so, he didn't see Rusty shoot a glance at his driver. Later that evening, Duncan was heading up to Skarloey Yard with some trucks. He was to deliver them and bring some empty ones back. Although he'd ridiculed Rusty's ghost story, he couldn't help but think about it. When he arrived, he quickly shunted his trucks. As the sun finished setting, Duncan became eager to leave.
Hurry up, or Skarloey will take my favourite spot in the sheds.
We've still got to pick up the empties and wait for Sir Handel to depart the station. We can't leave yet. Night had fallen by the time they set off. The moon was full and fog enveloped the landscape. Duncan whistled and the sound echoed everywhere.
Driver, stop!
What's wrong, Duncan?
I thought I saw something. It's the ghost! Take me back, please!
They didn't stop until they reached Skarloey Yard. We'll have to leave early tomorrow morning to get these trucks down to Croven's Gate. Are you alright, Duncan?
Of course I'm alright,
Duncan replied. He closed his eyes to try and get some rest. As his driver headed off to find a nearby hotel, Duncan didn't see him tuck a tape recorder into his pocket. Early the next morning, Duncan headed back down the line. He kept a close watch as he crossed the old iron bridge, but saw no sign of the ghost. Nor did he see any sign of the rock his driver had dropped the night before, just after playing the tape recording of a whistle. After crossing the bridge, Duncan found himself lost in thought. He'd ridiculed Rusty's story, and that had come back to haunt him. Perhaps the ghost had been trying to tell him something. He had dismissed more than just that story.
Oh, hello, Duncan. So, you're alright then?
Yes, I just ran into a bit of trouble last night. I had to bunk down in the Skarloey Yard. Anyway, Ivo Hugh, I think I need to say I'm sorry. You cannot be expected to have the experience of those of us who have been around for decades.
Thank you, I think.
You might as well take it, Ivo. It's the best apology you'll get from him.
Oh, well, thank you, Duncan. I will try to be more careful around trucks, though.
With that, Ivo Hugh backed down to collect his coaches.
Are you alright, Duncan? You sound a bit shaken.
Duncan quietly explained what had happened last night.
I'm sorry I was rude to you, Rusty.
Thank you, Duncan. This ghost you saw, what did it look like?
I'd rather not think about it. Look, I'd best shunt these trucks out of the way.
Before Rusty could reply, Duncan moved off.
I know you arranged for Duncan's crew to make those sounds, but how did you make it look like another engine was up there?
I didn't.
Rusty, where did you hear that story you told Duncan?
Oh, on the radio. Back in the 70s or 80s, I think. My driver back then liked listening to the radio while we went along the line.
I see. Thank you, Rusty.
Driver, could you open my regulator, please?
Certainly. Don't want to spend too much time on the old iron bridge, eh?
No!
Alright, calm down. Here you go.
There's no such thing as ghosts.